Hello, welcome again to another episode of Time of Reckoning. Today, I would like to talk a bit about leadership, our need for the kind of leadership that will help us to find the kind of friendship that can work for us as a people and as a nation. We have friends, so we claim, as nation states. Each country in post slave societies claim to have nations that are friends of their nation states. Whichever island state that is of a post slave or post colonial societies, our leaders usually take pride in the friendship of leaders of other nation states of the developed world or developing world that they boast on. It is a very common thing to hear leaders, for example, in the Caribbean, speak glowingly of their friendship with presidents of the United States, prime ministers of England, prime ministers of Canada, French presidents, and so on and so forth. But these friendships seems to hold little weight, especially when they're needed most. I have spoken in the past about the onslaught against third world countries, and especially these post-slave societies in the Caribbean. The war they are waging for equality in the OECD countries and organization. And it begs the question, who are standing up for us? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which is an arm of wealthy nations to hold developing states, poor developing countries at ransom. And they have literally no rules. They try to suffocate the economies of poor countries to literally bring them into subjection and make them continue to subsidize the economies of these rich countries. We have suffered at the hand of Canada. We have suffered at the hand of England. We have suffered at the hand of the French. And now we're suffering at the hands of the European Union. And so we just have to ask ourselves, where are our friends? I can't recall, ever since the formation of the OECD a few decades ago, any nation of the OECD who we claim are our quote unquote friends standing up for any Caribbean states against the onslaught of these different nations of the OECD to help our cause. Can't recall. You see, offshore businesses forms part of the lifeblood of Caribbean economies. Most post-slave societies are not rich in manufacturing. We're not strong in exports. And so we depend on tourism and we depend on offshore businesses to set up in our jurisdiction to provide jobs and also to help with tax revenue. And it's like each time we make one step forward, the OECD has pushed us 2 steps backwards. When the Canadian government does it, the British don't stand up for us. When the British government does it, the Canadian government don't stand up for us. But yet we hear these are our friends. And these countries depend on our small island developing states, who they claim are members of the United Nations, so that we can vote for them or with them when they have major issues benefiting their economies in their countries. So our leaders claim that they are friends of these leaders. Oh, this prime minister of this country in the Caribbean said they're friends of the Caribbean, of the Canadian prime minister, a friend of the British prime minister. But these friendships don't really benefit us when we need it most. It's kind of a fakeish friendship. It's not true friendship. They don't stand up for us. You know? So they need our votes in the UN General Assembly. And so they know how to dangle a little favor when they're ready. And we see that as friendship. But when we really need them, we don't have them. And so it leads me to talk today about our need for leadership. We need leaders who can stand up and help us to find friends that can help us. Because the truth is, when we think about the way the world is constructed, the construction of the world as it is in its present form was done before many of these post-slave societies were societies. You know, when we were colonies, the construction was taking place. And when we became independent nations, the construction had been complete. So it is like a world that we are no part of. They have made the world the way they want it. And so we became players in this same world order without having any part in its construction. So we boast about being member states or member countries, for example, of the United Nations. The United Nations organization, in its second appearance, the first time it was a League of Nations, was set up in 1945. No black nations had independence at that time. So the United Nations weren't set up to help us. They weren't set up with our interest as part of the planning. But we are now made to be players in it. If you recall, when the United States decided to lead a coalition to overthrow the leadership of the nation state of Iraq, there was a vote in the United Nations that overwhelmingly said that was the wrong move. And the then President George Bush Jr. said publicly that the United Nations is irrelevant. And I believe that that is one of the truest statements he has ever made. The relevance of the United Nations has always been in question. And if not for any other reason, it's for the fact that many, many nations became nations after the formation of the United Nations. So how could it be relevant? It could only serve the interest of those persons who were players at the time. And so the nation states of the world that literally control the United Nations, they don't work for us. They don't. Small island developing states, they don't work for us. So when we need help, we have nowhere to turn. We try to beg here, we try to beg there, but literally we have no help. What seems to be help is what is tantamount to helping those who really need the help. The crumbs that we benefit from off the table is really no help to us. And we must be frank about it. We must be frank about it. So we need leaders who can really make the sacrifice. And not just the leaders, We need leaders who can lead their people, lead their nation states to be prepared to make the sacrifice of nationhood where we can stand up and be counted. Those are the kinds of leaders that is required at this juncture of time. Because if we continue to have leaders who are going to be depending on those who are so-called friends, those who are fake friends, we are going to continue to languish where we are at since our independence until now. But I've always said that leaders are not only political leaders. Political leaders, they took and always take the lead nationally. But there have always been other leaders in the community, other leaders at the level of universities, colleges, the unions. These are all leaders too that can help to mobilize the required strength and fortitude that a nation state needs to stand strong. I am yet to hear doctors, nurses, lawyers, scientists, all of whom Caribbean nation states have in first world countries. I am yet to hear any of them stand up and speak out for the interests of their nation states where they are from. We have scientists in England that are from the Caribbean, in Canada, a lot of them in Europe. And when we are being made to suffer at the hands of even those European countries, I am yet to hear the voices of these leaders who should be leaders. They were educated at the expense of taxpayers in these small island states, and they are now qualified. They understand the subject matter. They understand the struggle. Why are they silent? Why are they not speaking out? Why are they not leading people to picket these governments? Nothing stops them except they don't have the will to do so. So I am calling on all our trained academics living in these countries to step up to the plate and let the leadership of the European Union, let the leadership of Canada, the leadership of the United States know that their unfair treatment of small island developing states, with their constant blacklisting of our efforts towards economic progress, is unfair, is wicked, is cruel, and that there are those who are feeling it and they need to know it. Our leaders need to step up. It's quite commendable to hear the Prime Minister of Barbados taking that radical step of calling out the European Union for their evil acts. And to know that the European Union, those nations making up the European Union, many of them were former slave owners in the Caribbean. And to see them treating Caribbean nations the way they're doing, they have no heart. They're unconscionable. Yes, they are wicked. And in the words of one of our black intellectuals who said, if they did not treat us right, they are not going to teach us right. We suffered at the hands of the European during enslavement. And today, they show no remorse, and they continue to treat us and our governments in a similar way as if we are a new kind of slave. And they need to be called out for it. So, the world is a very uneven place. And it is going to continue to be problematic for bigger countries. The more they continue to oppress small island developing states, is the greater their problem are going to be. Because all over the world, we see people having issues with mass migration. So when small island developing states are forced into perpetual struggle, slow development, lack of economic growth and opportunities, then the inhabitants of these small island developing states have very little recourse than to migrate to those countries. And the reality is they don't want us there. They don't want us there. It's not that we're begging them to help us to develop. We're just saying, stand aside and let us progress. Don't stand in our way. Don't stand in our way. And that's what they continue to do. Because the poorer we are, it's the longer we are going to continue to depend on them. And the more we depend on them, it's the more we are used as countries to subsidize their ailing economies. And that is very unfortunate. The United Nations can't help us because we don't really have any voice there. That is the world body that these unfair practices should be addressed. Caribbean island developing states should be able to go to the United Nations and speak about these injustices and get recourse. Not that our leaders don't try, but there's no recourse. Why? Because we're just basically wasting our time. The United Nations are not for us. Not for us. Why is it not for us? When it was set up, we were not at the table. So if we were not there in the formation, how could it be for us? Cannot be. So that organization definitely need to be revamped. Need to be revamped. When the League of Nations was formed in 1939, we knew what happened. It was formed to make sure that there was never another world war. When World War II started, the League of Nations went into the abyss. It went out of relevance. It was no longer necessary because it failed to stop what it was created to do. So after World War II, they set up the United Nations. True, since then, there is not a world war, so it might be serving the purpose for which it was intended. But it was not set up to see to justice for countries that never exist or existed at the time. So the reality is that the United Nations perhaps need to go into the abyss now, and a new organization need to be created that has equity for all. Caribbean governments should be able to go to the United Nations and have the United Nations General Assembly vote for Caribbean countries against the onslaught of the OECD and have overwhelming vote support that the OECD need to stop unfairly treating Caribbean nations and see if we would get some justice there. But we don't have that right now to call them to account there. They own the United Nations. They own it. They set it up. They own it. We have not much stake in it. So we need to call out the friendship of the Western world and say it is fake friendship, is not real. You might recall the times of the Cold War when capitalist countries, same European Union, though it did not exist then in its present form, but Europe and the United States and Canada that form the capitalist bloc of nations were at Cold War with the Soviet Union, the USSR, the United Soviet Socialist Republic, who was trying to cultivate friendship with these post-slave societies in the Caribbean and in Latin America, Central America. And they were gaining some kind of support. But they lost out in the end. During that Cold War era, many Caribbean nations were siding with socialist states because there seemed to have been more equity there. Who can forget Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Mikhail Gorbachev? That's where the war between capitalism and socialism effectively ended. And since that time, small island developing states suffer even more severe blows because there's hardly any help anywhere else. And so we now have to depend on the evil intentions of capitalism. Capitalism, consumerism goes hand in hand. You cannot have capitalism if you don't have consumerism. And so we find a situation where small island developing states are consumer nations. When you go into the supermarket in these countries of the Caribbean, Latin America, South America, you find so much produce, so many products from Europe, North America, on the shelves. Vegetables, carrots, pineapples, apples, so many things. When you hear the food bill that goes into buying these imported stuff, it's mind-blowing. So these folks want it to be that way. Right now, there is this big talk about a trade war between the United States and China. And the whole concept of that is that the United States claim that China is benefiting substantially more financially from the United States than the United States is benefiting from China. And so they want a leveling of the playing field. How cool is that? But how much do we in the Caribbean, for example, export to those countries? We don't really have anything to export there. And they like it so. We don't talk about trade war. We can't. Suppose we were to say we will not consume more from their countries than they consume from us. But we have nothing to export up there. Nothing. The few little things that we send up there is a drop in the bucket. So if we are the ones who should be talking about trade wars, you know. So they're unfairing us and complaining that China is unfairing them. So what is good for the geese or the goose is not good for the gander. How unfair is that? But that's the nature of capitalism. Greed, selfishness. Yes. So they're producing, they're manufacturing, dumping very often inferior stuff in our jurisdiction. And we have cultivated a taste for it. We like it. And it's like we can't do without it. So they take advantage of that. They take advantage of that. And all that happens is that we have to settle for a few tourists out of their countries to come into our country with a stronger currency to benefit our economies. But the reality is it has never been enough. It has never been enough. All the tourists that we claim to have visiting our shores, our GDP continue to be weak. In fact, you have billionaires in the United States, billionaire elsewhere too, whose net worth is more than the combined GDP of the entire Caribbean put together. But they like it so. They like it so. There is no equity. And we have no one to complain to. We have no friend in high places who can speak for us. Never happen. Because everyone wants a piece of the pie. That is, everyone that is capitalistic have this vested interest in poor economies, because that is how capitalism is going to continue to survive. These capitalist countries, they came into our space and harvest the best of our teachers, the best of our scientists, the best of our nurses, and pay them substantively less than they pay their own people. So it is substandard payment that they still get, even though it is better than what they get here. So they use that to lure them. And by doing that, it means that they are also limiting the extent to which we can develop scientifically, because our brightest minds are being harvested to work for them. So we need leaders who can see through those things and find a way to galvanize their nation state to put an end to those things. It's foolishness. It is foolishness. We don't feel strong enough to do it, but the longer we languish into not doing it, it's the harder it is going to be to do it. So our independence is not really going to mean a lot if we do not have leaders who can lead us into genuine independence. Genuine independence. So, just want to say that this is indeed a time of reckoning. And as small island developing states, we need to wake up as they say, and smell the coffee. There is no small island developing state that is not struggling and bursting at its seams with the issues of crime and violence and gun crime. We don't make guns in the Caribbean. But I put it to you that the countries that make guns have a vested interest in their guns being sold and being marketed legally or illegally. Because every gun that they manufacture that is no longer in their bond, of course, is sold. So whether it is sold legally or illegally, whether it finds its way in the Caribbean to create mayhem or any other part of the third world to create mayhem, it's no business of theirs. No business of theirs. Yet, we have ports, airports, seaport, and these weapons are coming through there, and it's as if our governments are completely unable to stop it. You know? So these guys have a vested interest in the mayhem that is created in our country as well. They like it so. They like it so. Guns are being sold. Ammunitions are being sold. And on top of that, they dumped persons from their countries who learn all the arts of evil in their country, their prisons. They dumped them now back into their country of origin. Some of them were not even born in the Caribbean, but they have Caribbean parentage. So they dumped them back in the Caribbean, where Caribbean governments are least equipped to deal with the high level of sophistication that these brought back into their space. But it's no problem to our friends, quote unquote, our fake friends, no problem. Britain, dump them here. United States, dump them here. Canada, dump them here. We are friends of these countries. We're friends of them. And so the mayhem continues. You know? So our leaders are being forced to recognize that it cannot be business as usual. Because business as usual is creating a mess in each of these countries. The murder rate in Jamaica speaks for itself. Barbados, which was a haven in the Caribbean, gun crime is now a serious cause for concern here. You know? So nowhere is being spared. Nowhere is being spared. We need leaders. And these leaders need to find us true friends who can help and make a difference. They need to mobilize their people to understand the struggle. Right now we are divided along party lines. And so you have 2 or more political parties in each Caribbean state. And each party have a way of siding with some foolishness of first world countries. So for example, when the Republican Party in the United States is in power, there are certain leadership in the Caribbean that they know that they can depend on to do their dirty work. And when the Democrats have the leadership in the United States, they also know who is favorable to them. They divide and rule these areas. The same is true in England. The same is true in Canada. They divide and rule our region to evil ends. And at the end of the day, none of them stand up for us when we need them. That's no secret. They don't stand up for us. I recall years ago when you have Air Jamaica, you still have the Caribbean Airways, and any of these planes were found in the United States to have drugs on it, marijuana or cocaine, they would impound that plane until the nation state pay the fine. So what they're trying to do is to make sure that Caribbean government ensure that drugs don't reach their jurisdictions. But we can't reciprocate when their guns find its way in our region and take innocent lives. We can't, we are powerless. We can't do anything. And we have no friends in the Congress of the United States, no friends in the Senate of the United States that can speak for us. None. And that is also true of Canada and of England. When we see a black person appointed to the Senate or to any other position of government in these countries, it's the biggest news for us. We're so happy. It's like the Lord has come a second time. But at the end of the day, we still don't benefit. Still don't benefit. All that it shows is that we can aspire to high office. It don't benefit us. Show the benefit.